Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Laurent Matheo. I'm a lead UI developer working for BMC. And right now I'm working on Innovation Studio that we are going to talk about today. And we are going to see how we can enrich Innovation Studio, adding some custom elements, because you can do a lot codelessly, but you can also add your own graphical and process elements. So that's what we are going to see today. So first of all, let's switch scenes. So some disclaimer, the agenda for today. And we are going to see a bit what is BMC Helix platform or Innovation Studio, like in a nutshell. So because you can do a couple of things with Innovation Studio, you can create records to store your data. You can create views to see your data or graphical element. You can create processes to implement your business processes. So rather than just going through the slide, I'm going to show to you what does that mean. So here we are on Innovation Studio, and we are going to create a small application, which is a pizza application. So you don't need an IDE, for example, to create an application. You can do that directly through the UI. So once the application is created, you have a couple of tabs. And in these tabs, you can create different type of objects. So the first one is records. So it's going to store, for example, your pizza. So I'm going to create one. Here, I'm just going to change the description to put the pizza name. Then you can do the same thing, for example, for your customers. So same thing, I'm just going to change it by full name. But you can add like different fields for the email, for first name, last name, address, and so on. They can create another one for to track the orders. And this one would be, I guess, the order ID. Once you have all your record definition that are going to store your different data, you can do a couple of things with that. And the thing that is pretty interesting with Innovation Studio is you can create association. So automatically you can say that, for example, a customer has orders. So the first record would be a customer, and a customer can have many orders. So later on, when you will display, for example, in your view, when the customer is going to log in, you will be able to see automatically, for example, the list of his order, or if you are like an admin or a manager for your pizza application, you can select a customer and automatically follow up to see the orders for these customers, rather than storing the ID somewhere and querying on the customer ID. Then what we have is we have the views. And the views is a graphical representation of pretty much your data or pretty much whatever you want. So if you are used to Remedy, one view is not tied to one specific record definition. It's more like a display-only concept. So instead of inside of this view, I could have like I said, different things. So I can have on the left the list of my customers. Here I will just add the full name. I will add the ID. And on the right side, I could have like a record editor that is going to allow me to create or modify data. And in this case, I want to modify my customer. So my customer is going to be the line I selected. And I'm just going to display the full name. So here I have admin, customer. And once I'm done with my view, I can just preview it. And here I will have the list of my customer. And when I select one, I will see his record on the right side. So that's our designer, and that's pretty much all our designers have the same concept. So, which means that on the left side, you have what you call the palette with a different type of graphical elements. So I use the container, I use a record grid, drag and drop element to see the different data from a record definition. And by the way, it's not only record definition from BMC, I mean, from Innovation Studio, it could be, for example, ITSM form as well. So for example, HPDL desk for incidents. So it's not only Innovation Studio. And then we have the record editor that is used, like I said, to create or modify data for one record instance or one form. So we have all different type of graphical elements. Then we have the canvas in the middle where we can drag and drop graphical elements. And on the right, we have the property. So in the first tab, we have the property of the view. And in the middle tab, we have the property of the view component that we currently select in the canvas. So here we have for record grid, the list of columns you can select, the filters you can have, and this kind of thing. So that's for the view. And then we have processes. So processes is pretty cool because, I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, we're good.
Okay. And so then we have processes, and processes is more something, it's BPMN. So it's here to handle your business process. So let's say, for example, that you create, so the customer orders some pizza. And when the order is created, we want to do a couple of things. Let's say that we have a log, or we have an order specifically for the cooks, so they know what pizzas they have to cook. What we can do is we can create a record on the record definition. Then we can send a message. So we can send an email to the cook line, and we can send another message, for example, to the customer to say, well, we received your order, and we will tell you what's the status of it. So then we can have what we call a user task. And what it will do is that it will pause the process until a condition is satisfied. So for example, if we do that on order, we could say that the completion criteria is going to be when the order is from being cooked to ready to be delivered, for example. And in this case, we can have like some, if everything went right. So we can have another send message to the customer to say that the delivery is in progress. And if something goes wrong, we can send, for example, an error message or something. So, and the good thing is you can see like visually everything that is going to happen. And when you're going to execute, so here I'm going to give it a name. So when you're going to, when the customer is going to create an order is pizza, you will be able in managed processes to actually visually see the order and to see at what step it is inside the process. It will be highlighted. So same principle. On the left, you've got a palette with the different process activities. In the middle, you have the canvas where you drag and drop. And on the right, you have the process activity, process parameters, and the activity settings. So one thing that is pretty cool is you can do a lot of things with out-of-the-box activities that BMC provides, but sometimes some things might be missing. So for example, let's say that I want to send a text message to the customer rather than sending just an email. So out of the box, we don't provide these capabilities. So you have a couple of options. The first one is we have a web API object that allows to consume third-party REST APIs. So if you have a vendor that provide REST API to send text messages, you can use that in your process. You can create a web API and use that in your process. But if your vendor does not provide this, so for example, like Twilio, they have some weird REST API that is not in JSON. So, but they provide a Java SDK. So what you can do is you can create your own activity that will appear inside the palette. So here I could drag and drop a Twilio text message, and I could modify my process to send an email and send a text message to a customer. So you can extend the palette, and so same thing, it will have input parameters, it will have output as well. So it will behave exactly like BMC out of the box activities. And same thing for the view. So let's say that our customer is going to order his pizza. He wants to know the status of his order. So by default, we don't have some kind of life cycle view component. So we want to see like a graphical representation. So by default, we don't have this component, but you can create one. So here I created one simple lifecycle view component. So what it does, it takes a record definition. So here, order. I will map it to status. And here are the different values I want to display to the customer. So for example, I could say that, of course, here the values are not good. I should change it to new, in progress, being cooked, maybe failure, delivery in progress, this kind of thing. So if you look at one of the example I made, so let's go back to this application. So it will behave pretty much like that. So here you have a life cycle configured with some status values. One is going to change. The customer will be able to see the progress. So 99% of the application would be codeless, but maybe the last 1%, you might need something that is custom. So let's go back to presentation. So like I said, we have the palette, we have the canvas, we have the properties for view designer. We have the actions as well that we are going to see a bit later. We have process designer. And what do you need what do you need to do in order to create those custom elements? So you just need like a standard development environment. I mean, it works on Windows, it works on Mac, it works on Linux. We actively actually test that on Windows and Mac, not so much on Linux. You need Java Open JDK, you need Maven, you need Node.js, you need an IDE. So you can use Eclipse. That's Eclipse. Or you can use another IDE like VS Code that a lot of people use internally. Or I use WebStorm in IntelliJ IDE because I have a license for it and I'm used to it. I'm using it for years. But you don't have to buy an IDE. You can just use whatever is going to work for you. So once you install our SDK, which is a zip file available in our docs, you need to type one Maven command, and it's going to create locally list of folders. It will create a project. So instead of going inside the UI and create a codeless application, here it's a coded application. So you will have the files locally on your laptop. So once it's built, you will have like a structure where you will have your Java code. Oh, let's remove my face for now. Where you will have a Java code and where you will have your UI code. That will be in Angular. So not only that, but you will have also in the DB folder, you will have your Innovation Studio object, because an application can not only have coded elements, but also records, views, processes, rules, and so on. So a coded application or coded library is really like a codeless application or library can contain the same type of object, but also coded elements. So if you want to go in the details, once you build your coded application, you will have a zip file. And inside this zip file, you will have a couple of things. So you will have a jar file and DB folder. The DB folder, like we saw, contains the views, the record definition, the processes for this bundle. But also it will contain, for example, let's say that I coded like a Twilio process activity. I need to provide the server the Twilio Java SDK. So this bundle will contain whatever is necessary for this Twilio integration to actually work. So it will contain the Twilio SDK and the dependencies for this Twilio SDK to work. So here it's Google Collection and HTTP client. It will contain also the UI assets. So it's if you're familiar with Angular, it's actually an Angular generated JS and CSS. You can also bundle assets. What we call assets, it can be like pictures, or it could be like an additional script, and it will be as well inside your bundle. So you have your zip file when it's generated, and inside the zip file, you will have the jar file I was talking about. That's just some mumbo jumbo. So once you're done locally with your application, it's time to deploy it the first time to Innovation Suite. So you have to type this command, and it will create the zip file, and it will push this zip file onto your Innovation Studio server, and it will appear on Innovation Studio, and you can create records, view processes, and so on. So after the first time, what you want to do is the same command, but -p export, -p deploy. And the idea behind that is, let's say that you have your coded application or coded library, you might create, like I said, views or record definitions. So what you want to do is first export from the server, take your codeless elements, so the views, the processes. So they are exported from the server and copied locally. And then you deploy your custom code remotely on the server. And once you are finishing developing, you can take this zip file, and for example, if you're on development environment and you want to push it to tailoring or to QA or to production, you take this zip file and you use the install functionality from the UI to install this zip file, and it will install your coded elements as well as the codeless parts of your bundle. So it basically will deploy your bundle. So what can you do on customization? So you can customize, like I showed a bit earlier, different kind of things. So you can customize the UI. So what I showed was the lifecycle view component. So you can have runtime and design time. You can have actions. And both of them are using Angular 10. It's a big difference from 2008 version released last year, where we are using Angular JS. And now we are using Angular 10. And it has some implications. So it's much easier to code because it uses TypeScript. And you can find a lot more third-party libraries that you can use in your code rather than coding everything by yourself. But we'll touch about it a bit later. And then at backend level, you can create a couple of objects. One, so we saw the Twilio activity, so you can use in rule and processes. But you can also create your custom REST API that can be pretty useful. So for example, instead of using like one big REST API where you can do everything, for example, like Remedy on HPD helpdesk, where you can create data, query data, you might want, for example, to focus on something really specific. Like if we take our pizza application, you could do something, I want to know the status of my order to integrate with a third-party website, for example. So you could say, well, I want to create a custom REST API that will have like / status order / and then passing the order ID. And it will just give you the ID, I mean, the status of your order. Something that is pretty cool now with Angular. Actually, it was working also in AngularJS, but like I said, AngularJS was end of life, so it was harder to get third-party libraries. Is you can use third-party packages. So for example, if you want to use Google Maps in your application, you can use what Google provides as a third-party library. So what they call an NPM library. If you want to create a QR code or scan QR codes or scan, for example, just, codes, if you want to scan assets or these kind of things, you have like libraries available on internet that you can integrate with your, in your Vue component. So here we'll go through some code. If I go and I'm looking for QR code, so you can see here, I mean, maybe you can see, yeah, it's maybe better this time. So you can see here that I'm using NGX KG UA, which is not something I coded. It's something that is coming from an NPM package, a third-party NPM package. So the cool thing is you don't have to really spend your time coding yourself something specific. You can just reuse whatever is accessible and whatever is available and maintained for quite some time by the community. So that's pretty nice. So then you have the Java third-party libraries that you can use. So I talked about Twilio. Oops, let's go back. And something that is new compared to AngularJS is you can use adapt UI elements. So what is adapt? Adapt is a graphical library that has been created by BMC adapt team. And it's a graphical library containing pretty much a lot of UI elements. So if you are used to developing in Angular, you learn, I guess you know about Google Material. It's pretty much the same idea. So when a BMC team wants, for example, a lifecycle bar, like I showed earlier, instead of each team creating his own lifecycle bars, they go to this adapt team and say, we need a lifecycle graphical element. And if it makes sense and it can be reused through different teams, this adapt team is creating this graphical element and different teams can use it. So for example, here for my graphical lifecycle, this is not something I coded. This is something that actually is provided by adapt. And the cool thing with that is if I go to the code, you can see that I have some objects, adapt workflow carousel, adapt workflow carousel slide. This is provided by adapt. So I just need to import in my code, in my Vue component, the right adapt module, which is adapt workflow. And after that, pass it some parameters. I don't have to code it myself. And adapt has a ton of things. They have like tabs, they have buttons, they have checkboxes, they have carousels, they have cards, like pretty much like digital workplace, for example, when you have your different requests, it's using adapt as well. So, and the good thing is now with this Angular version, you can tap into these graphical libraries that we are using internally at BMC. So we have a ton of things. We have lifecycle. Let's see, what do we have next? We have charts as well. So you don't have to code charts yourself or use a third-party library that provides different type of charts you can reuse, passing data. And the good thing is you can integrate it with your code. So for example, if I click on one specific entry, I will have a message. So that's also very important. It's the way your Vue component is going to be integrated in your Vue, passing data to this Vue component, receiving events from this Vue component. So in our SDK, we also give helpers. So it's with Angular, it's much easier to know what are the properties for one method, for example, to see what's available. So like I said, you have the lifecycle, you have the charts. And then if you decide to integrate with different libraries, which are not adapt, so here you have a QR code coming from an NPM third-party library to generate QR code. You can integrate with HCAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA from Google. If you want, for example, when someone is ordering a pizza to prove that this person is actually human. And you can even have like a digital signature. So let's say that the delivery guy goes to the customer and you want a signature. So we don't provide out of the box the signature component, but you can create your own using a third-party library. And so this way, on the iPad or whatever, device that the delivery guy has, the user can just sign. And you can see here that when I sign something, automatically the signature, the picture is actually passed into a record editor field. So that means that here, if I go to my digital signature, so here you can see that this digital signature view component is inside the record editor, which is on signature. So I could drag and drop it inside. It doesn't have any input parameter because it doesn't need to. But the interesting part is here I will tie, this is just a text field from the record editor. It's tied to the field signature base64. And you can see that its value, it's tied to the component digital signature output, this output parameter. So view component, of course, can have multiple input parameters and also output parameters. And here, as soon as the value of the output parameter of digital signature is changed, the value of this field is going to register that the value has changed. So it's a bit also a difference between, in paradigm between Remedy and Innovation Studio. You don't have to have an active link saying, oh, like on change digital signature, then set field on signature on this field. Here it's more like an event base. So here's the same thing. If I add an input parameter, I could listen or register to the value of another field or another view component, for example. So we have different type of view component that you can have in View Designer. Let's hide myself again. And one of them is the standalone view component and the record field view component. So what is the difference between both of them? I saw digital signature and lifecycle, for example. They are both standalone view components, meaning that they don't require a record editor to exist. The difference between both of them, it's pretty much exactly the same thing, but the record field view component is just a field type. So for example, here, when you are using a record editor input, you have different field type. For example, you have text, and the text is going to be mapped to one specific field from the record definition. So here, if I use this star rating record field view component, you can see that it says, oh, I cannot map to one specific field because you don't have the right field type, because this one requires an integer field inside your record definition. But if I use the same component, which is standalone, then you can see here that it's, because it's independent in number of stars, which is an input parameters from your view component, I could say, oh, it's tied maybe to a record editor, record instance, and one field. So it doesn't require a record editor to exist. I could drag and drop it outside the record editor and not having a record editor inside my view. Then we have the action that you can have. So the action is whatever is happening when you click on something. So here we have a button. And when I click on the button, I can have a list of actions. And here I can say what is going to happen when I click on this button. So here it's launching a process that we saw a bit earlier. So it's going to pass some input parameters to this process. And then the next action is refreshing the grid that was below, that is here. So here, if I click on that, oh, it's missing my name. So here, what it did, it's called a process, and it refreshed automatically the grid that was below. And when I click on the grid, I can see the signature that I did. So here you have some kind of palette on the left and all the available actions. So some of them are from BMC, from business workflow, but you can also create your own if you want to. So here, for example, depending on the fruit I pick, I will have different questions asked for it, and I can pick up some colors. So if I select watermelon, I will have different questions. And if I have apple, I have different questions. So you can create your own custom action if you want to as well. Then something that is quite important for me, but I don't know, it depends on people, is we have also inspectors or control. So what is an inspector or a control? So let's go back to the life cycle. It's something that you can find on the right side. So when you select a view component and you want to see its properties, here you can see what are the different statuses that I'm going to see inside my view. So here, if I preview, I have new, assigned, fixed, and rejected. New, assigned, fixed, and rejected, and I could decide to just don't use fixed. I go here, I refresh my page, and fixed is not here anymore, right? So, but out of the box, we don't have this inspector where you can list the statuses of one specific field. So here it's dynamically checking the list of status for this lifecycle example status field and display it as checkbox. You can check and uncheck. So we have some default control. So it could be, for example, the record definition, selection field. We have some expression editor when you can have you can enter different fields from elements in the canvas or just text. But this is custom. And this is something that I find really important because I think we should not only focus on whatever is going to be nice for the end user, for the customer. So here, the person that is going to order a pizza and checks the status, but also for the person that is going to create the application, because once the developer is done creating the custom elements, so the view components, the processes elements, those elements which are going to be available in the palette. So for example, here I have a lot of different elements. It's also important that the person that we call the business analyst, who is going to create those views and codeless application using those custom view components, to have it's important for them to have like a good user experience as well. So of course you could have like a text field like this and say with a nice tooltip next to it and say, well, you just need to have a string and pass the list of statuses you want to see. So new, assigned, rejected, and closed. You can have something like this. So here you could have a tooltip and explaining what you need to do. But it's not something that is really user-friendly. People are going to forget about it in time. If you change the status value, it's not going to be accurate anymore. So it's going to be a mess. So it's good to have like a way to have your custom controls. So this way, not only the end user will have a good user experience, but as well the person that is going to reuse your components. So if you're using my test, application, I think there is an example that shows all the different kind of inspectors. We'll try to see later if it's where it is. So in this example here, I was using a gradient. So by default, we have a color picker that is available, a color picker type. But if you have a gradient, you have a starting color and end color. So it's just instead of having two input parameters asking start color and color, you can create a custom inspector with just asking you in one go, in one parameter, okay, give me the start and end. And that would display actually live how your gradient is going to look like. So it's something nice. Then you can create a custom activity for the video text message. So you have input parameters, you have output parameters, and everything is dynamic. So which means that if you're looking at the Java code, you have some action parameter. It can be object as well. And it will return a class. And this class here, video text result class, has 3 members, but it could be like a list of objects. So it's pretty powerful. So if it's a list of objects in Process Designer, you could iterate through them, loop through them. That's pretty nice. Then we have the REST API I was talking about. So here it's generate password / a username, and it will return an answer. So in my example for the pizza application, it would be status order / order ID. And we have the data page query, which is a bit more advanced. Data page query is a type of object that we use actually in the grid. And it takes some input parameters like the page size, start index, the query expression, and it will return formatted data. So you could use that, for example, if you want to query a record definition and massage the data, for example, to do some calculation. Or if you want to connect to an external system, get the information and send them a formatted way. So if you have like a custom grid, you can say the data displaying in this grid is going to come from this data page query, and the grid will be able to display correctly this information. So here, I think there's a custom grid. So here for this one, you can see that it looks pretty much the same, displaying the data, but you can have like different type of elements. You have buttons, you have different colors, and you can see what happens when you click on it. So it looks exactly the same because it is the same object as BMC grid out of the box, but it's consuming a custom data page query. So it could be linked to another system or a REST API, these kind of things. Then the nice thing with Angular compared to Angular JS is when you create, when you want to create a new component. So let's say that you want to create a digital signature component. You have a command line that allows you, and if you're used to Angular development, that's exactly the way that Angular works. So ng-g, which means ng generate. You would have, for example, in Angular, ng-g component and the name of the component. And it would create automatically a list of files with the correct name, with the correct file structure, and automatically registering this component inside your code. So you don't have to do it yourself. So we have our custom, what they call schematics. So which means that if you're typing this command, we will create automatically whatever is needed for a custom view component to actually work. So if we are looking inside the lifecycle example, I know it's a bit small, but I cannot really zoom on it. You will see that you have a design folder containing some files and runtime containing some files. So design is whatever is for the design time, so view designer, and runtime are the files that are going to be used to once the view is executed, displayed by the end user. That's why I was saying that you could have two user experience, one for the business analyst who is going to consume this view component, and one for the end user that is going to see at runtime the output of the view. So before in AngularJS, we told you to just copy paste like an existing view component and modify manually the name of the files and whatever name of the view component and everything. So it was error prone. So now it's actually much easier for you. So you can do the same thing for view component. So like I said, it's going to create like different files and register it automatically inside your code. You can do the same thing with field view component. And you can do the same thing with actions as well. So for the backend object, so for custom process activities and custom REST APIs and so on, we don't have this feature yet. That's something that I want to see in the SDK, and I hope that we will have. So you need to create manually, but to be honest, it's much easier for the backend because most of the time it's just one Java class, and the registration is just one line. So it's actually much easier, but that's something I would like to see in the product at some point. One thing also that is pretty nice is how you can debug your view component or your process activity in the product. So you have to type like this line, which is just to say, oh, I want to launch my application on the Innovation Studio server, distant Innovation Studio server. And if you are used to Angular development, it will just compile everything and it will serve everything on localhost 4200. So when you connect, you just have to replace the URLs that you are using currently. So the domain name, the IP or the domain name and the port by localhost 4200, and everything will be served locally. And you will have access to runtime and design time as well. So it's easier to debug whatever you're doing. And when you are changing something in your code, automatically the code that you modified is going to be rebuilt and the view is going to refresh. So you will see immediately your changes on the UI. For Java, it's standard Java development. So you can connect with the Innovation Studio server through remote host connection on the port 12444. And then you can just put a breakpoint inside your IDE. And when the code is going to hit your code, is going to stop and you will be able to see what are the different values. But code swap is not really possible. So if you modify something in your code, you will have to deploy your application again to see the modification. Then you have some more advanced feature. So the one that I was talking about was adapt components that instead of using Google Material, for example, I really encourage you to actually use our adapt components because we maintain them and they fit the BMC graphical library, the look and feel. So it will be just easier to use, and also it will match, the color scheme. If you are moving to dark mode or light mode, it will match that as well automatically. So it's just better. So you have UI resources I was talking about. So you can use pictures or you can use scripts. So here, for example, this picture is actually bundled inside your application. So you don't have to host this picture on a public website. You can just consume it within your bundle. So this is something that that is a problem right now. And that's something that we are working on. When you are debugging your application, the path is different than the one in the runtime. So if you are using pictures, for example, your picture might not show in debug time. So I created a service and you can use that will automatically switch the right path. It will detect if you're in debug mode or runtime mode, and it will modify the right path. So that's also in the example live application that I provide. That's something I want to fix in the product at some point. Then we have NPM Resources. So like I said, it's third-party NPM libraries. So the webcam, for example. So the way you can use this third-party library. So here you can see Google Maps, YouTube Player. You just go to the folder, and the same way you would do with an regular Angular application, you just type npm install and the name of the library. It's going to be added in the list of dependencies, and then you can use that in your code. There is nothing really specific to do. Backend resources, I mean, it's a Maven project, so you can just declare here for the Twilio SDK I was talking about, and automatically at build, it will be bundled inside the application zip file. So that we saw earlier, it's input and output parameters for the custom process activity. Then we provide localization as well, so you can localize your UI. So let's say that you have to be in English and French. You can have at runtime, instead of having like in your view or view component, one specific message, the Google API key is missing, you could have declare a string, and you will be able to export this string, translate it into French, put it inside your application, and automatically, depending on the, for example, admin settings or whatever has been defined by your web browser local, it will display the message in French or in English. So we have a documentation on that. So you can use after that the ngx translate or in your HTML or TypeScript code. So for backend, it's limited pretty much to exception handling. Something I would like to talk about is the global JavaScript. So you might need it for the Google Analytics in order to be sure that one specific script is always going to be loaded. So you have some ways to do that. I give an example here. That's something that we discourage because we try to, for example, when you have a view component and this view component is in a view but not inside another view, it's not loaded. So, but if you have something that is loaded globally, as soon as the library is loaded, your global script is going to be loaded. So here you have an example that is in the docs. So, and then we have the integration. So we have a couple of different integrations that are possible. So let's say that you want to, let's say that you have a website on the left. So here is digital workplace. And let's say that you want to display a view from Innovation Studio inside your digital workplace that is on premise, or on the left, you could have like even your customer portal, your portal that doesn't have Remedy single sign-on. So there is a way to make it work, and this is RSSO pre-authentication, which means that if your user is authenticated on your portal, you don't want your user to see a login and password again page to actually see, for example, a view from Innovation Studio. So for that, there is, so you need to create a certificate. The private key is going to go on here, digital workplace, and the public key on RSSO server. On DWP, you will have some different parameters that you need to set up. But basically what's going to happen, and this is for DWP, or this is for your own portal, when the user Bob is going to connect, the application is going to create a JOT token based on the certificate and going to sign it with the certificate. Then it's going to build an URL saying, oh, I want to consume this PWA view, and I'm going to pass this token. This is going to go to the RSSO server. The RSSO server is going to see that for the user Bob, we want to create a session. So it's going to check that the certificate is correct, that the signature is correct. And if it's correct, it's going to create a session automatically for Bob. And this way, the view from business workflow is going to be displayed here inside DWP, but it could be also displayed in your third-party application, like your portal. Then we have the integration with Helix platform. Since I guess there were some talks about the Converge server. So it's basically you have ITSM or Remedy on the same platform as Innovation Studio. So like I showed you earlier, you can, from Innovation Studio, tap into forms from Remedy. So here it's incident. And what you can decide to do is enrich the business process for an incident. So you could, let's say that you want to synchronize an incident onto like a different platform like Jira or something. So you could, when an incident is creating or modified, you could trigger a process. And this process may do a web request to your different system and, for example, push the incident information, synchronize. So here in this example, it would take the business service from this incident, do a query on it, for example, to see the status, if it's a router, to perform a trace route, get the trace route example, create an attachment, and create an incident work log with the attachment and the result of the trace route. But another example is if you have an incident and you want, for example, to send a text message to the assignee, so something quite simple, that's not something that is really easy to do in Developer Studio if your vendor doesn't have a REST API, let's say. So in this case, what you could do is when an incident is created and someone is assigned to it, the process could be launched. And inside the process, we could be sure that the assignee has a user phone, and we would send a text message to the user using this custom activity. And the only thing that is a custom activity here would be the Twilio text message. So we have a couple of things in store for the future. So like I said, the schematics for backend element, better upgrade experience, better localization experience. And of course, if you have some feedback, we really want to hear from you. And before the questions, I would like to point to the documentation. You can request a development environment, which is 2008 for now. Not yet Converge server, but I think it's going to be here in the future. If you need some assistance, so you have the BMC community developer group, and we are actually setting some other channels. So we would have like a more direct approach. You have BMC has now a public GitHub frontend. So if you go to this GitHub repo, you will actually see the different examples I made. So the first one is for 2008, but you have also for 21 or 21.3, which is the Angular version. And inside this 21.3 or 21.05, you have actually a lot of documentation that is done. So you have a list of all the different examples that are here, the different JavaScript elements. Each JavaScript element is described, what it is interested. I mean, what is the part that is really interested for this particular element. And you have also some guides. And these guides is going to tell you exactly how to create an application, how to create a view component, how to create an action. So you have that in a text form. And you have also videos on my YouTube channel. So where you have like 15 videos, and you will create an application and create global CSS classes, create a view component, an action, and so on. So you have some videos I was talking about. So, and if you have any questions, so I am on the BMC community, I am on Twitter, you can send me an email. I mean, there are different ways to contact me. Well, thank you very much. And I don't know if we have time for questions.
No, we don't. Thanks. Yeah. Unfortunately, you passed up 5 minutes extra too, but it was great information. Thanks, Laurent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so go ahead and stop recording.